She was just trying to sneak out of the worst blind date of her life. But when Clara pushed through the wrong exit door, she didn't find the alleyway. She found Chicago's most ruthless crime boss standing over a bleeding hostage. His eyes locked onto hers, and her nightmare truly began. Clara Reynolds stared at the rim of her crystal water glass, wishing the sparkling liquid inside was straight vodka. She was 28, a brilliant senior bookkeeper at O'Connor and Smith Accounting, and currently enduring the most agonizing 90 minutes of her entire existence. The torture chamber was the Gilded Lily, a hyper-exclusive, dimly lit restaurant in downtown Chicago, where the entrees cost more than her weekly grocery budget. The torturer was Greg Hastings. Greg was a junior vice president in wealth management, a man whose entire personality was built around his crypto portfolio, his golf handicap, and his relentless dedication to intermittent fasting. He was also the man Clara's well-meaning but misguided sister, Sarah, had set her up with. "He's so driven, Clara," Sarah had chirped over the phone. "And he's looking to settle down. Just give him a chance." Clara shifted in her seat. The dining chair was an elegant, narrow piece of mid-century modern torture, with metal armrests that dug sharply into her hips. Clara was a size 18, a fact she usually carried with quiet confidence. She had a beautiful soft face, thick auburn hair that fell in waves down her back and curves that she had spent years learning to dress and love. Tonight, she wore a stunning midnight blue wrap dress that accentuated her chest and cinched at her waist. But sitting across from Greg, she felt like a giant, clumsy monster who had accidentally stumbled into a porcelain shop. "I just think it's a matter of discipline," Greg was saying, cutting a tiny, precise square of his dry grilled chicken. He hadn't stopped talking for 45 minutes. "I mean, my trainer says that 90% of society's health problems could be solved if people just had the willpower to put the fork down. Don't you agree?" He looked up, his pale blue eyes dropping pointedly to the plate of rich, creamy lobster risotto Clara had ordered. Clara felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. It wasn't the first microaggression of the night. When she had first walked in and introduced herself, Greg's smile had faltered his eyes, doing a quick, calculating sweep of her body, before he had forced a tight, polite grin. "Ah," his eyes had said. "The picture didn't show the rest of you." "I think health is highly individual, Greg," Clara said, evenly maintaining her composure. "And I think enjoying a good meal after a 60-hour work week is a pretty decent way to live." Greg chuckled, a condescending sound that made Clara want to throw her butter knife at his forehead. Right. Body positivity and all that. I mean, I think it's really brave how you don't care about your carb intake. My ex was a fitness model, and she would have had a panic attack just looking at your plate. But hey, confidence is key, right? Clara's hands trembled under the table. She took a slow, deep breath, reining in the sudden urge to cry. She didn't need this. She was a professional who untangled multi-million-dollar financial messes for breakfast. She had spent the last 3 weeks exhausted, tracking down a massive, stressful discrepancy for a shell corporation called Brightwood Logistics. She had come out tonight, hoping for a nice conversation and a good meal. Instead, she was being negged by a man who looked like he ironed his socks. "Excuse me," Clara said, her voice tight but controlled. She stood up carefully, maneuvering out of the restrictive chair. "I need to use the powder room." "Take your time," Greg said, already picking up his phone to check his emails. "I'll go ahead and ask for the check. We should probably wrap this up anyway. I have an early spin class." Clara didn't bother responding. She grabbed her leather clutch, turned on the heel of her black pumps, and walked away. As she navigated the labyrinth of tables, a fierce, protective anger began to replace the humiliation. She wasn't going back to that table. She absolutely refused to sit there for another 5 minutes while Greg paid the bill and gave her a patronizing side hug goodbye. She pulled out her phone quickly, typing a text to her sister. "Your blind date just told me I was brave for eating risotto. I am bailing. Do not ever set me up again." Clara bypassed the restrooms entirely. She needed to get out, but the front entrance meant walking directly past Greg's line of sight. She scanned the dimly lit restaurant and spotted a young busboy carrying a tray of empty glasses near the kitchen doors. "Excuse me?" Clara whispered, stepping into his path. "Is there a side exit, a patio door, or an alleyway I really need to leave, and I'm trying to avoid someone?" The busboy looked at her sympathetically, taking in her flustered expression. "Yeah, don't go through the kitchen," the chef will yell. "Go down that hallway to the left. Take a right at the end. There's a heavy oak door that leads out to the private valet's alley." "Thank you," Clara breathed, pressing a crumpled $20 bill from her clutch into his hand. She hurried down the hallway, the ambient chatter and soft jazz music of the main dining room fading with every step. The corridor was lined with thick velvet red wallpaper and dark mahogany trim. It felt isolated, almost completely cut off from the rest of the building. Clara reached the end of the hall and turned right just as the busboy had said. There it was, a massive, unmarked oak door with a heavy brass handle. She pushed her weight against it. It clicked open. Clara stepped through, expecting the cool night air of Chicago and the smell of exhaust fumes. Instead, the heavy oak door slammed shut behind her with a definitive echoing thud, and Clara froze the air, leaving her lungs in a sharp, icy gasp. She wasn't in an alleyway. The room was a sprawling, soundproofed VIP dining suite, completely hidden from the public eye. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight over the windows. The air smelled sharply of expensive cigar smoke, spilled whiskey, and the metallic, unmistakable tang of fresh blood. In the center of the room sat a long mahogany dining table. At the far end, a man was tied to a wooden chair. His face was a bruised, bloody mess, his expensive suit torn. Clara instantly recognized him from local news broadcasts. Alderman Richard Hayes, one of Chicago's most prominent city council members. Standing on either side of the alderman were two massive men in dark suits, their expressions stony and impassive. One of them held a pair of silver brass knuckles, but it was the man sitting casually at the head of the table who commanded the room's terrifying energy. He was leaning back in a plush leather armchair, a glass of amber liquid resting loosely in his large, scarred hand. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that clung to a broad, muscular frame. His hair was dark, styled neatly, and his face was carved from granite-sharp jaw, aristocratic nose, and eyes so dark they looked like endless voids. This was Dominic Romano. He wasn't on the news, but in the circles of power that ran the Chicago underworld, his name was a ghost story, whispered to keep rivals in line. At the sound of the door slamming, the entire room froze. The two guards whipped around. In a fraction of a second, two suppressed handguns were drawn and leveled directly at Clara's chest. Clara's heart stopped her. A deafening, ringing silence filled her ears. She stood paralyzed, her hand still hovering near the brass doorknob behind her. Her mind screamed at her to open it to run, but her legs had turned to lead. "Well," Dominic Romano said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that sent a violent shiver down Clara's spine. It held no surprise, only a dark, simmering amusement. "This is a breach in security." "Boss," one of the guards growled, his gun steady on Clara. "Give the word." Dominic slowly set his whiskey glass on the table. He raised a single commanding hand. The guards instantly lowered their weapons, though they didn't holster them. Dominic stood up. He was terrifyingly tall, moving with the lazy, deliberate grace of an apex predator, circling trapped prey. He walked slowly around the edge of the table, his dark eyes fixed on Clara. Clara couldn't breathe. Her chest heaved against the fabric of her wrap dress, her knuckles turning white as she clutched her small leather bag. Dominic stopped just a few feet away from her. He tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over her. Unlike Greg's dismissive, insulting scan, Dominic's eyes burned with an entirely different intensity. He looked at her soft curves, her terrified green eyes, the flush of panic on her pale skin. It wasn't a look of disgust. It was a look of absolute, consuming hunger. I took a wrong turn," Clara stammered, her voice cracking. "I was on a blind date. He was awful. A waiter told me the exit was down this hall. I swear to God I didn't see anything. I'll just leave." She reached blindly for the door handle behind her, but Dominic was faster. He stepped into her personal space, his large hand slamming against the oak door right next to her head, trapping her. The scent of him, sandalwood smoke, and sheer unfiltered danger enveloped her. "A blind date," Dominic murmured, looking down at her lips before his eyes met hers again. "A man made you feel so uncomfortable that you fled into my private dining room." "Yes," Clara whispered, shrinking back against the solid wood. "Please, just let me go." A slow, chilling smile touched the corner of Dominic's mouth. "That's the fascinating part about this, Clara." Her breath hitched. "He knows my name. You see," Dominic continued, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, lethal whisper. "I've been looking for you. I bought out half this restaurant tonight, just to have this little chat with our corrupt alderman here. But my real business this week, it was finding the brilliant, incredibly meddlesome bookkeeper at O'Connor and Smith." Clara's stomach plummeted into an endless abyss. "Brightwood Logistics. You found a $3 million leak in my supply chain," Dominic said, trailing a single calloused knuckle down the side of her soft cheek. Clara flinched, but he didn't pull away. "You untangled a web that my best accountants spent 6 months burying. You were a massive liability, Clara Reynolds. I came here tonight intending to find you and eliminate the threat." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. "I didn't know," she choked out. "It was just an audit. I didn't know it was yours. I didn't tell the police." "I know," Dominic said softly. He leaned in closer, his lips almost brushing her ear. "And now that you're standing in front of me, now that I see the beautiful, clever creature who outsmarted my entire syndicate, I find myself facing a dilemma." He pulled back just enough to look into her terrified, tear-filled eyes. His gaze dropped to the deep curve of her cleavage, then down to the flare of her hips in the tight dress, before snapping back to her face. "I don't want to kill you anymore," Dominic stated, his voice heavy with a dark, possessive certainty. "Then let me go," Clara pleaded, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. Dominic caught the tear with his thumb, wiping it away with shocking gentleness. His eyes darkened, the finality in them sealing her fate. "You were trying to escape him," Dominic murmured, stepping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "But you just walked straight into my cage." His hand moved to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her thick auburn hair, holding her in place. "You belong to me now." The transition from the claustrophobic terror of the gilded lily to the sprawling, sky-high luxury of Dominic Romano's penthouse happened in a blur of tinted SUV windows and heavily armed escorts. Clara Reynolds sat completely rigid on the edge of a custom-built white leather sofa that probably cost more than her college education. Her mind was a fractured kaleidoscope of panic. Just 2 hours ago, Her biggest concern had been Greg's patronizing monologue about carbohydrates. Now she was locked inside a state-of-the-art fortress overlooking the glittering skyline of downtown Chicago, held captive by a man who ruled the city's criminal underworld. Dominic stood by a massive floor-to-ceiling window, pouring 2 glasses of Macallan 25 from a crystal decanter. He had removed his suit jacket, revealing a tailored black dress shirt that stretched taut over his broad shoulders and thick chest. The rolled-up sleeves exposed forearms wrapped in dark, intricate ink. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a dark, lethal corporate CEO. "Drink," Dominic commanded, softly walking over and pressing the heavy crystal glass into her trembling hands. Clara took at her fingers, brushing his. His skin was warm and rough with calluses. "Am I a prisoner?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the chaotic drumming of her heart. Dominic took a slow sip of his whiskey, his pitch-black eyes studying her intensely. "That depends entirely on your perspective, Clara. To the men outside that door, you are an invaluable asset under my absolute protection. To your former employers, you are a dead woman walking." Clara frowned, her thick auburn brows drawing together in confusion. "My employers, O'Connor and Smith. What do they have to do with this?" Dominic sighed, setting his glass down on a sleek glass coffee table. He walked toward a heavy oak desk in the corner of the room, picked up a thick manila folder, and tossed it onto the cushion beside her. The bold red letters stamped across the top read, "Brightwood Logistics. Confidential." "Open it," he instructed. Clara set her drink aside and picked up the folder. As a senior bookkeeper, she had spent the last 3 weeks agonizing over these exact spreadsheets. But as she flipped through the pages, she realized these weren't her pristine, audited documents. These were emails, internal memos, wire transfer receipts. Her eyes scanned the top email sent from the personal account of her boss, Richard Smith, to a man named Liam Sullivan. To L. Sullivan. "The bait has been taken. I assigned the Brightwood accounts to our most meticulous bookkeeper, Reynolds. She is brilliant, but entirely oblivious. She will undoubtedly find the $3 million discrepancy by Friday. Once she flags it and alerts the authorities, Romano will be forced to silence her. A dead civilian will trigger a federal RICO investigation, and Romano's grip on the South Side ports will crumble. Your takeover will be seamless." The blood drained from Clara's face. The room suddenly felt freezing. She read it again. And then a third time. The words blurred as tears of profound, agonizing betrayal welled in her eyes. Richard Smith. The man who had hired her, who had smiled warmly at her office birthday parties, who had praised her work ethic, had deliberately set her up to be murdered. The Sullivan Syndicate. Dominic explained, his voice low and utterly devoid of mercy. "The Irish mob. They've been trying to push me out of the shipping ports for 3 years. They knew they couldn't hit me directly, so they bought your boss. They needed a sacrificial lamb, Clara. A sweet, innocent, rule-following civilian who would stumble onto my laundered money. They knew I would have to kill whoever found it." Clara's breath hitched into a sob. She dropped the folder, wrapping her arms around her own waist. "They used me," she whispered, the reality crashing down. "They used me to trigger a war. They wanted you to kill me." "Yes," Dominic said, stepping closer. He knelt in front of her, a man of staggering power, lowering himself to eye level with a terrified bookkeeper. "But they miscalculated." Dominic continued, his gaze drifting over her soft, tear-stained face, down to the heavy, gorgeous curves of her body, wrapped in midnight blue. "They thought I would view you as a disposable problem. They didn't realize that I have been tracking the person who cracked my ledgers for a week, and I was already fascinated by the genius it took to do it." And they certainly didn't know that when the brilliant accountant finally stumbled into my dining room, she would be the most intoxicating, beautiful woman I had ever seen. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, searching his dark, ruthless eyes for a lie, a joke, a trick. But she found none. For her entire life, men had looked at her with conditions. Men like Greg saw her weight as a flaw to be corrected, a hurdle they had to graciously overlook. But the way Dominic Romano looked at her, it was sheer, unadulterated hunger. He didn't see a woman who needed to change. He saw a queen he wanted to claim. "You're not going to kill me," Clara breathed, stating it not as a question, but as a newfound, terrifying realization. Dominic reached out his large, scarred hand, gently cupping the side of her face. His thumb brushed away a fallen tear. "If anyone ever tries to lay a finger on you, Clara, I will burn this entire city to the ground. You are under my protection now. But protection is not enough. I need to know what you want to do about the men who tried to throw your life away." The sorrow in Clara's chest slowly began to calcify. The fear that had kept her paralyzed in that restaurant was evaporating, replaced by a hot, blistering rage. She had played by the rules her entire life. She had worked 60-hour weeks. She had endured the condescension of men like Greg and the fake smiles of men like Richard Smith, and what had it gotten her? A death sentence. Clara looked at the folder. Then she looked back at the Mafia boss kneeling before her. "Mr. Romano," Clara said, her voice dropping an octave, finding a sharp, razor-like edge she didn't know she possessed. "I know the financial architecture of O'Connor and Smith better than the founders do. I have backdoor administrative access to their offshore routing servers." Dominic's eyes flared with sudden sharp interest. A dangerous smirk played on his lips. "Is that so?" "Yes," Clara said, sitting up straighter, her soft curves radiating sudden, fierce authority. "Richard Smith wants to play with cartel money. I can bankrupt him. I can freeze Liam Sullivan's entire operational budget before the sun comes up. But I need a secure terminal, a ghost IP address, and 3 pots of black coffee." Dominic let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated straight through Clara's core. He stood up, towering over her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of immense pride and dark lust. "Whatever you need, Mia Regina," Dominic purred. "It's yours." By 3 a.m., Dominic's private office had become a war room. Clara sat behind a massive mahogany desk, her high heels kicked off her bare feet, resting on a Persian rug. 3 glowing monitors illuminated her intensely focused face. Her fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with blistering speed, executing lines of code and exploiting security vulnerabilities she had discovered months ago, but had never dared to touch. Dominic leaned against the edge of the desk, sipping black coffee, utterly mesmerized. He had commanded armies of ruthless men. He had ordered hits, orchestrated hostile corporate takeovers, and smuggled millions in contraband. But watching this brilliant, voluptuous woman systematically dismantle an empire with nothing but keystrokes was the most magnificent thing he had ever witnessed. Richard Smith used a dual-layered encryption for his personal Cayman accounts. Clara muttered, her eyes darting across the screens. He thought it was secure, but he reused the administrative passwords from the firm's HR portal. She scoffed a sound of pure disgust. "Amateurs. And the Sullivan accounts?" Dominic asked, his voice a low rumble. "Liam Sullivan's money is tied into a shell corporation registered under Celtic Holdings," Clara explained, pulling up a new terminal window. "I'm currently rerouting all their liquid assets, roughly $42 million, through a decentralized crypto tumbler." Clara paused, looking up at Dominic with a vindictive glint in her green eyes. "Speaking of crypto, That awful man from my blind date tonight. Greg Hastings. He's the portfolio manager who authorized